You are welcome. Please kindly subscribe to our channel so that you can get notified anytime we drop another life-transforming and educative story.
The art gallery buzzed with life as patrons mingled among vibrant canvases, each stroke telling a story of its own. Emmanuel, with a canvas tucked under his arm, stepped into the gallery, his heart pounding with anticipation. This wasn't just another exhibition, it was a chance to share his soul with the world. Elma wandered through the gallery, her eyes alight with wonder as she admired the masterpieces adorning the walls. Dressed in a flowing dress that accentuated her slender frame, she moved with an effortless grace that turned heads wherever she went. Her long flowing hair framed her face like a halo, adding to her ethereal beauty. Emmanuel's gaze lingered on Elma as she paused before one of his paintings, her lips curved into a soft smile. He felt a surge of pride and nerves mingle within him as he approached her, his footsteps echoing in the hushed atmosphere of the gallery. "Hello," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, yet it carried across the space between them. Elma turned to face him, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "Hi there," she replied, her voice as melodious as a symphony. "Your work is incredible. I'm captivated by the emotions you've captured." A flush of warmth spread through Emmanuel's chest at her words. "Thank you," he said, his voice tinged with gratitude. "I'm Emmanuel." "I'm Elma," she said, extending her hand towards him, their fingers intertwined in a brief yet electric connection that sent shivers down Emmanuel's spine. As they chatted, Emmanuel learned that Elma shared his passion for art, despite her background in linguistics. Her insights into his work were profound, touching on nuances he hadn't even realized he'd imbued into his paintings. Before he knew it, the gallery began to empty as closing time approached. Reluctantly, Emmanuel and Elma parted ways, promising to meet again soon. As Emmanuel made his way home that evening, his mind buzzed with thoughts of Elma. There was something about her that drew him in, a magnetic pull he couldn't resist. Little did he know, their encounter at the gallery was just the beginning of a journey that would change both of their lives forever. As the days turned into weeks, Emmanuel and Elma's connection deepened, blossoming into a romance neither of them could deny. Their dates were a whirlwind of excitement and discovery, each moment spent together bringing them closer than ever before. Their first official date was a night to remember. Emmanuel had planned a surprise for Elma, whisking her away to one of Lagos's trendiest clubs. The pulsating rhythm of the music filled the air as they danced the night away, lost in each other's arms. Elma's laughter rang out like music to Emmanuel's ears as they moved in perfect harmony on the dance floor. Her eyes sparkled with joy, reflecting the neon lights that bathed the club in a kaleidoscope of colors. After the club, they strolled hand in hand along the moonlit streets, lost in conversation as they shared their hopes, dreams, and fears with one another. It was as if they had known each other for a lifetime, their souls intertwining in a dance as old as time itself. Their next date took them to an art gallery, where they marveled at the intricate brushstrokes and vibrant colors that adorned the walls. Emmanuel watched with pride as Elma admired his work, her eyes alight with wonder and admiration. They spent hours wandering through the gallery, discussing art, life, and everything in between. Each painting seemed to hold a story of its own, reflecting the emotions and experiences of the artist who had created it. As the afternoon sun began to fade, they ventured outside hand in hand in search of their next adventure. They stumbled upon a quaint cafe tucked away in a quiet corner of the city, its cozy atmosphere inviting them to linger a while longer. Over cups of steaming coffee and slices of decadent cake, they shared stories of their past, their present, and their hopes for the future. It was a moment of pure connection, a meeting of hearts and minds that transcended time and space. Their relationship continued to flourish as they explored the city together, discovering hidden gems and secret hideaways that only added to the magic of their romance. From rooftop bars with panoramic views of the skyline to intimate jazz clubs tucked away in dimly lit alleyways, they reveled in each other's company, savoring every moment they spent together. As they fell deeper in love with each passing day, Emmanuel and Elma knew that their journey was just beginning. Little did they know the trials and tribulations that lay ahead would test the strength of their bond, pushing them to the limits of their endurance and beyond. But for now, in this moment, they were content to bask in the glow of their newfound love, grateful for the chance to share their lives with one another. The soft glow of the evening sun cast a warm golden hue over the city as Emmanuel made his way to Elma's apartment. He couldn't wait to see her, his heart skipping with anticipation at the thought of being in her arms once more. As he approached her door, he could hear the faint strains of music drifting through the air, a gentle melody that seemed to beckon him closer. With a quick knock, he waited, the seconds stretching into eternity until finally the door swung open, revealing Elma's radiant smile. "Hey you," she said, her voice tinged with excitement as she pulled him into a tight embrace. "I've been waiting for you." Emmanuel returned her embrace, his heart soaring at the sight of her. "I've missed you," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her forehead. As they settled into the cozy confines of her apartment, Elma took a deep breath, her eyes searching his for reassurance. "Emmanuel, there's something I need to tell you," she began, her voice trembling ever so slightly. Emmanuel's brow furrowed with concern as he took her hands in his gaze unwavering. "What is it, Elma? You can tell me anything." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Elma's face before she took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. "I'm pregnant," she said softly, her words hanging in the air like a delicate thread. For a moment, Emmanuel was stunned into silence, his mind reeling with disbelief. But then, as the weight of her words sank in, a wave of joy washed over him, filling every corner of his being with an overwhelming sense of love and happiness. "Oh, Elma," he breathed, his voice choked with emotion as he pulled her into his arms. "This is incredible news. I can't believe we're going to be parents." Tears pricked at the corners of Elma's eyes as she buried her face in his chest, overcome with relief at his reaction. "I was so worried about how you would take it," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Emmanuel held her close, his arms a comforting embrace around her trembling form. "There's nothing to worry about, my love. We're in this together, every step of the way." As they sat together in the warm embrace of their love, Emmanuel felt a surge of determination wash over him. He wanted nothing more than to spend the rest of his life with Elma, building a future together that was filled with love, laughter, and endless possibilities. "Elma, there's something I need to ask you," he said, his voice steady with conviction as he took her hands in his. "I love you more than words can express, and I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy. Will you marry me?" Tears of joy streamed down Elma's face as she nodded, her heart overflowing with love for the man who had captured her soul. "Yes, Emmanuel. 1,000 times yes." With their future stretched out before them like a blank canvas waiting to be filled, Emmanuel and Elma knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, hand in hand, bound by a love that was as timeless as the stars themselves. The air hummed with anticipation as Emmanuel guided Elma through the grand entrance of his father's mansion. The sprawling estate exuded an air of opulence and prestige, a stark contrast to the bustling streets of... As they approached the door, Emmanuel couldn't shake the feeling of nervousness that coiled in the pit of his stomach. This was the moment he had been dreading, the moment when his two worlds would collide in a whirlwind of emotions and revelations. With a deep breath, he rang the doorbell, the sound echoing through the marble foyer like a clarion call. Moments later, the door swung open, revealing his father standing on the threshold, his expression inscrutable. "Father, this is Elma," Emmanuel said, his voice tinged with a mixture of pride and apprehension. Chief Donald's gaze swept over Elma, his eyes narrowing with scrutiny as he took in her appearance. There was a flicker of recognition in his eyes, a spark of something familiar that sent a shiver down Emmanuel's spine. "Elma, it's a pleasure to meet you," Chief Donald said, his voice smooth as silk yet tinged with an undercurrent of tension. Elma smiled politely, her demeanor poised and composed despite the palpable tension in the air. "Likewise, Chief Donald. Thank you for welcoming me into your home." As they settled into the plush surroundings of the living room, Emmanuel could feel the weight of his father's gaze bearing down on them like a heavy cloak. There was something he wasn't saying, something lurking beneath the surface of his composed exterior. "Elma," Tell me about your family, Chief Donald said suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. Elma hesitated for a moment, her eyes flickering towards Emmanuel before she spoke. I was raised by my mother in Port Harcourt. My father passed away when I was young, so it's just been the two of us. Chief Donald's brow furrowed with confusion as he listened to her words, a sense of unease settling over him like a dark cloud. And your mother's name? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Her name is Veronica, Elma replied, her voice steady despite the growing tension in the room. Chief Donald's eyes widened with shock at the mention of her name, his mind racing as he processed the information before him. What is your mother's skin color, her maiden name, her people, her height? He inquired, his voice urgent. Elma furrowed her brow, puzzled by the sudden barrage of questions. My mother is light-skinned. Her maiden name is Phillips. She is from the Yoruba tribe, and she is of average height, she answered, her voice tinged with confusion. A stunned silence fell over the room as Chief Donald processed her answers, his mind racing with 1,000 thoughts and memories long buried. Then, as realization dawned like a bolt of lightning, Chief Donald's face contorted with anguish and disbelief. No, it can't be, he whispered, his voice barely audible as he struggled to comprehend the truth staring him in the face. Tears welled in Elma's eyes as she watched Chief Donald's reaction, her heart breaking at the pain etched on his face. What's wrong, Chief Donald? She asked softly, her voice trembling with fear. But Chief Donald would hear none of it, his world crumbling around him as he struggled to come to terms with the truth. Emmanuel, he said, his voice choked with emotion as he turned to his son. Elma is not just your girlfriend, she's your twin sister. Emmanuel's heart stopped in his chest as he stared at his father in disbelief, the weight of his words sinking in like a stone. Everything he thought he knew had been turned upside down in an instant, leaving him reeling with shock and confusion. As the truth of their shared lineage washed over them like a tidal wave, Emmanuel and Elma clung to each other, their hearts heavy with the weight of the revelation. Little did they know, the road ahead would be fraught with challenges and obstacles, testing the strength of their bond in ways they could never have imagined. But for now, in this moment, they held on to each other, determined to face whatever the future held together, as one. The air in Elma's apartment crackled with tension as she led her mother, Veronica, into the room where Emmanuel sat waiting, a nervous smile playing on his lips. He fidgeted with his hands, unsure of what to expect from this long-awaited reunion with the woman he had never known. Mom, this is Emmanuel, Elma said, her voice tinged with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Veronica's eyes widened with surprise as she took in the sight of her son, her heart swelling with love and joy at the sight of him. Emmanuel, she breathed, her voice choked with emotion as she rushed forward to embrace him. My son. Tears welled in Emmanuel's eyes as he returned his mother's embrace, the weight of a lifetime of longing and separation lifting from his shoulders in that moment of connection. Veronica pulled back, her eyes shining with tears as she studied her son's face, committing every detail to memory. You've grown into such a fine young man, she said, her voice filled with pride. Emmanuel smiled, his heart overflowing with love for the woman who had given him life. Thank you, Mom, he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. Veronica turned to Elma, her eyes shining with gratitude. Thank you for bringing us together, Elma, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. I can't tell you how much this means to me. Elma smiled, her heart swelling with happiness at the sight of her mother and her son finally reunited after so many years apart. As they settled around the dining table, Veronica insisted on preparing a meal for her son, her hands moving with practiced skill as she chopped vegetables and stirred pots on the stove. Emmanuel watched in awe, his heart overflowing with love for the woman who had sacrificed so much for him. Once the food was ready and they had all taken their seats at the table, Veronica turned to Emmanuel, her eyes shining with curiosity. Tell me, my son, what have you been up to all these years? What do you do for work? Do you have a family of your own? Emmanuel opened his mouth to respond, but before he could utter a word, Elma interjected, her voice trembling with nervousness. Mom, there's something I need to tell you, she said softly, her eyes flickering towards Emmanuel before returning to her mother's gaze. Veronica raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. What is it, Elma? It must be important if you're interrupting our meal. Elma took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. "Mom, Emmanuel and we're together," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I'm pregnant." Veronica's fork clattered to the table, her face paling with shock as she processed her daughter's words. "Pregnant?" she repeated, her voice barely audible above the din of their surroundings. "But how? And with Emmanuel?" Veronica's world spun out of control as the truth of their shared lineage washed over her like a tidal wave, leaving her reeling with shock and disbelief. She stared at her son, her mind racing with a whirlwind of emotions as she struggled to comprehend the enormity of what she had just learned. Emmanuel reached out to take his mother's hand, his heart heavy with the weight of the truth he was about to reveal. "Mom," he began softly, "before we continue, I want to reassure you about Dad. Our father, he's been well, living peacefully." Veronica's eyes filled with tears at the mention of her ex-husband, her heart aching with the memories of their shared past. "Thank you, Emmanuel," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "That means a lot to me." As the weight of their shared history settled over them like a heavy blanket, Emmanuel, Elma and Veronica sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts and emotions. Little did they know, the road ahead would be fraught with challenges and obstacles, testing the strength of their bond in ways they could never have imagined. But for now, in this moment, they clung to each other, determined to face whatever the future held, as one family reunited at last. Emmanuel held the phone tightly to his ear, his heart pounding with anticipation as he dialed his father's number. After what felt like an eternity, the call connected, and he took a deep breath before speaking. "Dad, it's me," he said, his voice steady despite the nervous flutter in his chest. "I need to talk to you about something important." Chief Donald's voice crackled over the line, his tone brimming with curiosity. "What is it, Emmanuel? Is everything okay?" Emmanuel hesitated for a moment, before plunging into the heart of the matter. "I've met Mom," he began, his words hanging in the air like a heavy weight, "and Elma and I are bringing her to your house to discuss everything." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line before Chief Donald spoke, his voice tinged with disbelief. "My God," he whispered, his words barely audible above the din of their surroundings. "This is unexpected." As the day of the meeting dawned, Emmanuel and Elma arrived at their father's house, their hearts heavy with anticipation and dread. They were greeted by a tense atmosphere, their parents' faces etched with strain as they prepared to face the truth of their shared past. As they settled into the living room, the tension in the air was palpable, a thick fog of unease that hung over them like a dark cloud. Emmanuel and Elma exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to expect from this long-awaited reunion. Then, without warning, their parents erupted into a flurry of accusations and recriminations, their voices rising in a cacophony of anger and frustration. Chief Donald blamed Veronica for the dissolution of their marriage, accusing her of infidelity and betrayal, while Veronica lashed out at him for his unfounded suspicions and lack of trust. Emmanuel and Elma watched in stunned silence as their parents hurled insults and accusations at each other, their hearts heavy with the weight of their shared pain and resentment. It was as if the wounds of the past had been reopened, laid bare for all to see in the harsh light of truth. But as the shouting continued, a strange sense of calm settled over the room, like the eye of a storm in the midst of chaos. Slowly, their parents' voices grew softer, their anger dissipating like smoke in the wind. Finally, as the last echoes of their argument faded into the silence, Emmanuel and Elma stepped forward, their voices steady with determination. "Mom, Dad," Emmanuel began, his word cutting through the tension like a knife. "We need to know the truth, what really happened all those years ago." Their parents exchanged a weary glance before turning to face their children, their eyes filled with sorrow and regret. And as they began to speak, the pieces of the puzzle slowly fell into place, revealing a story of love and loss, betrayal and redemption that would change their lives forever. The air in the room grew heavy with anticipation as Chief Donald took a deep breath, steeling himself for the painful journey into the depths of the past. Emmanuel and Elma watched him with bated breath, their hearts pounding in their chests as they waited for him to speak. "It all started 25 years ago," Chief Donald began, his voice tinged with sorrow and regret. Your mother and I were deeply in love, or so I thought. But as time went on, doubts began to creep into my mind. He paused, his gaze distant as he recalled the events of the past. I suspected your mother of infidelity, he continued, his words hanging in the air like a dark cloud. I had no proof, just a gut feeling that refused to be ignored. Emmanuel and Elma exchanged a startled glance, their minds racing with the implications of their father's words. Could it be true? Could their mother have been unfaithful to their father all those years ago? Chief Donald sighed, the weight of his confession bearing down on him like a heavy burden. I had to know the truth, he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. So I secretly arranged for DNA tests to be done on both of you, without your mother's knowledge. The room fell silent, the gravity of his words sinking in like a stone. Emmanuel and Elma exchanged a stunned glance, their minds reeling with the enormity of what they had just learned. Their entire world had been turned upside down in an instant, leaving them grappling with the harsh reality of their past. And what did the tests reveal? Elma asked softly, her voice barely audible above the pounding of her heart. Chief Donald hesitated for a moment before speaking, his voice heavy with sorrow. The tests confirmed my worst fears, he admitted, his words laced with regret. You were both my children, but I had doubted it, and in doing so I had shattered the very foundation of our family. Tears welled in Emmanuel's eyes as he listened to his father's confession, his heart heavy with the weight of their shared pain and betrayal. What happened next? He asked softly, his voice trembling with emotion. Chief Donald bowed his head, his eyes filled with shame. Your mother, she found out about the tests, he confessed, his voice choked with emotion. And when she realized what I had done, she demanded a divorce. The room fell silent, the weight of their parents' shared pain hanging over them like a dark cloud. Emmanuel and Elma exchanged a sorrowful glance, their hearts heavy with the knowledge of the wounds that had torn their family apart so many years ago. And so, Chief Donald concluded, his voice heavy with regret, we went our separate ways. Your mother took you, Elma, and I took Emmanuel. And in the end we were left with nothing but regret and the shattered pieces of our broken family. As the echoes of their father's words faded into the silence, Emmanuel and Elma sat in stunned silence, grappling with the harsh reality of their past. Little did they know the road ahead would be fraught with challenges and obstacles, testing the strength of their bond in ways they could never have imagined. But for now, in this moment, they clung to each other, determined to face whatever the future held, as one family reunited at last. The room seemed to hold its breath, as Veronica's confession hung in the air, her words piercing through the heavy silence like shards of glass. Emmanuel and Elma exchanged a glance, their hearts heavy with the weight of their mother's revelation. Could it be true? Could their mother have truly betrayed their father all those years ago? Veronica's voice wavered with emotion as she continued, her gaze locked with her ex-husband's. I made a mistake, she admitted softly, her eyes brimming with tears. I cheated on you, Donald, just once, but it was a mistake I have regretted every single day since. Donald's expression softened, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and understanding. Veronica, he began, his voice thick with emotion. I had suspected as much, but hearing you say it. Veronica reached out, her hand trembling as she touched his, her heart aching with remorse. I'm so sorry, Donald, she whispered, her voice barely above a whisper. I have spent the last 25 years living with the weight of my actions, wishing I could take it all back. Emmanuel and Elma watched their parents with tears in their eyes, their hearts breaking at the sight of the pain and regret etched on their faces. Mom, Dad, Emmanuel spoke up, his voice filled with compassion. It's been so long. Isn't it time to let go of the past and forgive each other? Elma nodded in agreement, her voice steady with determination. Life is too short to hold on to grudges, she added softly. We need to forgive each other and move forward, together. Donald and Veronica exchanged a tentative glance, their hearts heavy with the weight of their shared history. But as they looked into each other's eyes, they saw the glimmer of hope and redemption shining through the darkness of their past. Veronica took a deep breath, her voice trembling with emotion. "Donald, you need to know that I tried," she confessed, her eyes pleading for understanding. "For 5 years after our divorce, I made frantic efforts to reach out to you, to reconcile, or at least to see Emmanuel. But you had left the country with him, and I couldn't find you anywhere." Donald's eyes widened with surprise at her revelation, his heart aching at the thought of the missed opportunities for reconciliation. "Veronica, I had no idea," he whispered, his voice filled with regret. With tears streaming down their cheeks, Donald and Veronica embraced, their arms wrapped around each other in a silent embrace of forgiveness and redemption. And in that moment, the wounds of the past began to heal, replaced by a sense of peace and reconciliation that washed over them like a healing balm. As Emmanuel and Elma looked on, their hearts filled with gratitude and hope for the future. After 25 years of separation and pain, their family had finally found its way back to each other, stronger and more united than ever before. And as they stood together hand in hand, they knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together as one family, bound by love and forgiveness for all time. The air in the room felt heavy with tension as Emmanuel, Elma, and their parents sat together, the weight of their recent revelations still hanging over them like a dark cloud. Despite the newfound sense of unity and forgiveness, there was a palpable sense of unease that seemed to permeate the space. Veronica cleared her throat, breaking the heavy silence that enveloped them. "Emmanuel, Elma," she began, her voice soft yet tinged with sorrow. "We need to talk about the future, about the baby." Emmanuel's heart skipped a beat at the mention of the baby, his mind swirling with a mixture of emotions. He turned to look at Elma, his eyes searching hers for some sign of what she was feeling. Elma met his gaze, her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know what to do, Emmanuel," she whispered, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "I want to keep the baby, but—" She trailed off, unable to voice the thoughts that swirled in her mind like a whirlwind of doubts and fears. The weight of their family's expectations bore down on her like a heavy burden, threatening to crush her beneath its weight. Veronica reached out to take her daughter's hand, her touch gentle yet filled with resolve. "Elma, sweetheart," she said softly, her voice tinged with sadness. "I know this is difficult, but keeping the baby is not an option." Elma's heart constricted at her mother's words, her mind reeling with the enormity of what she was being asked to do. "But why?" she whispered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why can't we keep the baby?" Veronica sighed, her gaze filled with compassion. "Because, my dear," she began, her voice steady yet filled with sorrow, "keeping the baby would bring nothing but pain and suffering to our family. It would be a stigma that would plague us for years to come, casting a shadow over everything we hold dear." Emmanuel's heart sank at his mother's words, the reality of their situation hitting him like a punch to the gut. He knew she was right, knew that keeping the baby would only bring more heartache and turmoil to their already fragile family. Donald spoke up, his voice grave yet filled with conviction. "As much as it pains me to say this, Elma," he began, his words heavy with regret, "aborting the pregnancy is the only option. We cannot risk tarnishing our newfound unity with the weight of this burden." Tears welled in Elma's eyes as she listened to her parents' words, her heart breaking at the thought of what she was being asked to do. But deep down she knew they were right. Keeping the baby would only perpetuate the cycle of pain and suffering that had plagued their family for far too long. With a heavy heart, Elma nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Okay," she whispered, her words hanging in the air like a heavy weight. As the reality of their decision settled over them like a shroud of sorrow, Emmanuel wrapped his arms around Elma, holding her close as they clung to each other for comfort and solace. They knew that the road ahead would be difficult, filled with heartache and pain, but they also knew that they would face it together, as one family bound by love and forgiveness. As the decision to terminate the pregnancy settled over them like a heavy blanket of sorrow, Emmanuel and Elma found themselves faced with yet another difficult choice, the prospect of separation. It was a decision born out of necessity, a desperate attempt to give their wounded hearts the time and space they needed to heal. Veronica's voice broke the heavy silence that hung over them like a shroud. "Elma, Emmanuel," she began softly, her eyes filled with sorrow. We have come to a difficult decision, but one that we believe is necessary for the healing of our family. Elma's heart clenched at her mother's words, her mind reeling with the enormity of what was being asked of her. "What decision?" she whispered, her voice barely above a whisper. Veronica took a deep breath, her gaze steady yet filled with compassion. "We have decided that it would be best for you to relocate to the United Kingdom," she explained gently. "There, you will continue your education and stay away from Emmanuel for a time, so that the feelings you have for each other can gradually wane." Elma's heart sank at her mother's words, the thought of being separated from Emmanuel filling her with a sense of profound sadness. But deep down, she knew that it was the right decision, knew that they needed time and space to heal their wounded hearts. Emmanuel's eyes widened in shock at the mention of Elma leaving, his heart pounding in his chest at the thought of being separated from her. "But Mom, Dad," he protested, his voice trembling with emotion. "I can't bear the thought of being away from Elma." Donald placed a comforting hand on his son's shoulder, his gaze filled with understanding. "I know it's difficult, son," he said softly, "but it's for the best. We need time to heal, to rebuild our family, and this is the best way to do it." With a heavy heart, Emmanuel nodded, his eyes brimming with tears. "Okay," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the pounding of his heart. As the reality of their decision sank in, Emmanuel and Elma found themselves faced with the prospect of saying goodbye, of parting ways for an unknown period of time. It was a moment filled with sorrow and regret, but also with a sense of hope for the future. With tears streaming down their cheeks, Emmanuel and Elma embraced, holding on to each other tightly as if they were afraid to let go. "I love you, Elma," Emmanuel whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "I will wait for you, no matter how long it takes." "I love you too, Emmanuel," Elma whispered back, her voice trembling with tears. "I will never forget you, never stop loving you." And as they stood together, their hearts entwined in a bond that could never be broken, Emmanuel and Elma knew that no matter where life took them, they would always carry each other in their hearts, bound by a love that transcended time and distance. With a final embrace, Emmanuel and Elma parted ways, each carrying with them the bittersweet memories of their time together and the hope for a future filled with joy and happiness. And as they walked their separate paths, they knew that one day their paths would converge once again, leading them back to each other in a reunion of joy amidst tears.